streaking across the water like jets on a runway. The power racers are the fastest vessels afloat. They compete on an ever-changing race course where a shift in wind or a wave can be deadly. Built to maneuver swiftly and maintain stability under extreme conditions, on calmer waters like rivers and protected lakes, the power racers known as unlimited hydroplanes race on shorter courses. Their lightweight twin hulls skim across the water, barely touching the surface. Powered by 2,800 horsepower turbine engines, originally designed for military helicopters, they can reach speeds of over 200 miles per hour. A modern unlimited like the Miss Budweiser is nearly 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, and weighs 6,000 pounds. To power its engine, it carries 60 gallons of jet fuel. Both offshore power racers and unlimited hydroplanes attract a hard-charging breed of driver with rapid reflexes, stamina, and an essential calmness under pressure. Some are designers and mechanical geniuses in their own right. Some are death-defying gamblers who are actually attracted by the extreme danger of their sport. Some enjoy the high life, the crowds, the television cameras. Others concentrate on improving their boats and racing skills. But they all share a single passion, as have powerboat drivers from the beginning. They all dream, no matter what it takes, of crossing the finish line first. The Detroit River, 1918. A fiery powerboat driver named Gar Wood charges across the finish line in his sleek new vessel, Miss Detroit 3, to win America's premier motorboat race, the Gold Cup. A masterpiece of engineering, Miss Detroit 3 was the first racer to be powered by an aircraft engine adapted for marine use, a 1,650 cubic inch, 12-cylinder Curtiss V4.
Power and speed and weight all work together to make a fast boat. You need a certain amount of power, but you need that power with the least cost to weight. An aircraft engine, because it's got to fly, is the lightest power available. So these very light engines that were being built for early airplanes were put into race boats.
But its engine was only one of Miss Detroit 3's advanced features. It also possessed a step hull, a feature that hydrodynamically lifted the bow out of the water.
A step hull is a hull that will plane on top of the surface. And the word step is very descriptive. The hull comes back, and then there's a big notch in it, and it continues back. And that notch, like part of the boat's been cut out, that creates less friction because there's friction up front, but where the step is, there's no friction. So that allows the boat to go considerably faster.
Pioneered by an innovative boat builder named Christopher Columbus Smith, the step hull was a tremendous improvement over earlier hull forms. When Chris Smith and Gar Wood combined the step hull with the Curtiss V4 in the Miss Detroit 3, everyone in the young sport of motorboat racing was quickly convinced that racers powered by aircraft engines were going to be unbeatable for the foreseeable future. After the trailblazing success of Miss Detroit 3, Wood concentrated on adding more power to his power racers.
When Gar started racing, there was one motor in every boat. That was pretty much the standard. He put 2 in. When that caught on and other people put 2 motors in, he put 4 in. So eventually, you see some of Gar Wood's huge boats with 4 motors, and they were incredibly fast.
Starting with his first win in 1917, Gar Wood dominated American powerboat racing, claiming 5 Gold Cups in a row. By 1921, he had no equals. So he took his latest and fastest boat, Miss America, to England and became the first American to win the International Harmsworth Trophy. Wiry and impulsive with irrepressible vigor, Gar Wood became the sport's first true superstar. Over the next 16 years, he won a total of 8 Harmsworth trophies by building a succession of 10 Miss Americas, each one more powerful than the last.
There were not that many changes or innovations in his hulls. They just became longer and bigger to accommodate more power. By 1929, when Miss America 8 was built, the boat was 30 feet long, just a foot and a half longer than the Miss America 1, but it was a little wider, and 2 massive V12 Packard aircraft engines were fitted in. Each motor put out about 1,200 horsepower, which was phenomenal at that time.
He had to have a man riding along with him to keep the engines running at roughly the same revolutions per minute, just to keep everything going. And he got an incredible speed, I believe, of 119 miles an hour, which for that kind of a hull was very fast.
While Garwood sought greater speeds by finding resourceful ways of boosting his horsepower, others did it differently, by reshaping the powerboat's stepped hull to lessen its contact and friction with the water. One designer named Arno Appel with Ventnor Boat Works in New Jersey was especially innovative.
If you look at the Miss America, and there's a single step in the center of the boat, and that step is directly under the boat, Arno Appel took that single step, split it into two, and placed the step on each side of the boat to increase the footprint of the boat so it was wider and could turn better with less a chance of tipping over.
Appel crafted his two parallel steps into pontoon-like running surfaces called sponsons. Their purpose was to trap air under the boat and generate an aerodynamic force that lifted a large portion of the hull off the surface, thereby lessening the area of the vessel that came in contact with the drag-inducing water. This in turn meant that less power was needed to move the boat to a given speed. Since it planed across the surface of water on 3 points, the two sponsons and the propeller, the new hull was aptly called a three-point hydroplane. With the three-point hydroplane, Arno Appel had charted the way for the future, and his design would spawn a whole family of power racers that would culminate in the unlimited hydroplanes of today. But the new boats had one major drawback. More lightly constructed and delicately balanced than boats with more traditional hull forms, they lacked the stability and durability to race in rough waters. They would rather skim across a smooth river or lake at spine-chilling speeds. This is the domain of the power racers that had descended directly from Arno Appel's three-point races of the 1930s. The radical-looking unlimited hydroplanes. The date was 1946. The place was the Detroit River, where the first Gold Cup race since the end of World War II was about to begin. Popular band leader Guy Lombardo was set to drive the sleek Tempo 6. Designed by Arno Appel, the Tempo was previously named My Sin and had won the last Gold Cup race in 1941. She was favored to win again, but there was a wild card in this race, one that would spark a revolution in hydroplane design. Her name was Miss Golden Gate 3, and unlike any of her competitors, she was powered by a war-surplus Allison aircraft engine.
There were thousands and thousands of surplus motors. The Allison was available very inexpensively, really almost free. I know stories of guys who bought beautiful twin-engine P-38s simply for the gas that was in them.
With 12 cylinders and 1,710 cubic inches, the Allison engine was big and powerful. But unlike earlier engines of that size, the Allison was built of light magnesium aluminum alloy and weighed only 900 pounds. Just as Garwood had unveiled the Miss Detroit 3 at the close of World War I, 28 years before, with a lightweight surplus aircraft engine, Miss Golden Gate was repeating history. On the Detroit River in 1946, Miss Golden Gate roared to an early lead, but had to drop out of the race due to mechanical problems. Tempo 6 skimmed by her at the last minute to snatch the victory. However, Lombardo recognized the tremendous potential of the Allison aircraft engine and soon had one fitted into the Tempo 6. Many other racers soon followed suit. The marriage of the three-point hydroplane with the powerful Allison engine ushered in the era of the fastest race boats in the world, the so-called unlimited hydroplanes. Yet because of the incredible sound they made, their fans soon began calling them by a different name: thunderboats. Over the next few years, as engineers adapted the new aircraft engines to run smoothly in their boats, a young designer in Seattle fashioned a hull crafted to take full advantage of the new engine's power. His name was Ted Jones, and his ingenuity would one day earn him the title Grandfather of the Unlimiteds. His son Ron Jones remembers.
In the case of my father, who had no formal training and barely made it out of high school, I often refer to Dad as a seat-of-the-pants designer. My dad had the ability to think of something, build it, see it in his mind, and then go run it. And when he was in the cockpit running the boat, he had this inherent feel for what was happening. And he would say to himself, next time I'm going to make this change or that change, and he did.
Ted Jones' masterpiece was the 28-foot slow-motion 4, built out of mahogany strengthened with lightweight duralumin. Weighing only 4,600 pounds and mounting a powerful Allison aircraft engine, Slow Motion had an unprecedented horsepower-to-weight ratio. Yet her most revolutionary feature was the shape of her hull. In contrast to the Tempo 6, which dragged a portion of its tail through the water, Jones designed Slow Motion with aerodynamics in mind to help lessen its contact with the surface.
The Tempo 6, when you look at that, you see the 3 points, but it has very little aerodynamic feature. The deck is very flat. It looks simply like a race boat, like the Miss America, with little flippers on the side. If you look at the Slow Motion 4, it's got this beautiful, graceful deck curve, which is an airfoil, which generates lift. At the same time, there's a tunnel underneath on the bottom, which compresses the air as the air comes through, and that generates lift.
To lift Slow Motion's tail from the water, Ted Jones designed a surface-piercing propeller. Taking the normally submerged propeller, he positioned it high at the water's surface so that only one blade at a time dipped into the water. This combination of hull and propeller created the prototype of a whole new generation of unlimited hydroplanes called three-point prop riders.
If you simply move some weight forward so that the boat teeters forward like a teeter-totter and the tail comes up, and then if you create a propeller that is going to be happy up there on the surface of the water, you get a prop riding boat. The propeller has to generate a certain amount of lift to keep that tail up, and the tunnel of the boat has to present a certain amount of lift to keep the boat itself up. So you end up with a boat that's essentially supported on a cushion of air, two little balance points on each side, and the propeller in the rear providing the thrust.
Thanks to Ted Jones' innovations, Slow Motion was the fastest boat on the water.
I was fortunate to get a ride in Slow Mo 4 when I was 17 years old, and I made the mistake as we came by the dock. I noticed some people that I recognized as we came by at about 165 miles an hour, and I was going to wave, and I put my arm out in the slipstream, and my shoulder is still sore today.
In 1950, Ted Jones entered Slow Motion in the Gold Cup competition in Detroit. By the end of the race, she was so far in front she had lapped nearly everyone in the field twice. Back in her hometown of Seattle, Washington, she became the pride of the city, drawing several 100,000 fans whenever she raced, and foreshadowing the emergence of Seattle as the future capital of unlimited hydroplane racing. Slow Motion dominated hydroplane racing for nearly half a decade. Then in 1956, while qualifying for a race in Detroit, she was wrecked in a high-speed accident. Miraculously, no one was killed in the mishap. Her owner, Stan Sayers, was so bereft he refused to lay eyes on the wreckage. He died in his sleep 2 weeks later. Her demolished frame was flown home to Seattle and put on public display, where hundreds of mourning fans filed by to view her. But her memory lived on, and 34 years later, Slow Motion 4 was restored by loving fans and donated to the Hydroplane Raceboat Museum in Seattle. Despite the demise of his creation, Ted Jones didn't slow down for a minute. On the crest of his success in the mid-50s, he designed a new prop riding unlimited called Miss Thriftway. Drawing on all he'd learned racing Slow Motion, he lightened the boat, widened the running surfaces, and changed the propeller angle. He also decided to search for a new driver. In Detroit, he found a hard-charging young man with a raw yet promising talent. Ted Jones hired him on the spot. His name was Bill Muncey, and he was destined to become the greatest, most beloved unlimited driver in history. Of all the unlimited hydroplane drivers, Bill Muncey is the most admired. Racing for nearly 30 years, with over 60 career victories, Muncey was known for his shrewd tactics and his unflinching will to win no matter what the odds. Throughout his career, he always looked for any edge he could find to beat his competition.
I remember talking with one of his competitors, a fellow named Steve Reynolds, and he told me how when he and Muncey would go into a corner together, that Muncey wouldn't look at where the boat was going. He would look over at Steve and look at Steve until he could make eye contact with Steve. And as soon as he did, he would slide his hands on the wheel like he was turning. He would just slide his hands over, and Steve on the inside would think that Muncey was going to turn and come in on him. So Steve would back out, and Muncey would just power on through.
Muncey won his first Gold Cup in 1956 at the age of 25 in the three-point prop rider Miss Thriftway, designed by Ted Jones. For the next 7 years, he enjoyed an unprecedented winning streak while driving a succession of 3 unbeatable Miss Thriftways. Much in demand, he decided to join the Atlas Van Lines team in 1971. It looked like a promising alliance, but after 2 years, the competition stiffened and he lost 30 races in a row. One of his obstacles was a new breed of unlimited hydroplanes designed by a young visionary named Ron Jones. Raised in the talented design family, Ron, like his father, is a self-described seat-of-his-pants designer.
I used to watch those boats go around the corner, and I kept saying to myself, there's something radically wrong here. A boat should not leap and dive and almost throw the driver out every time they come to the corner.
One solution to stabilizing the boat on turns was to situate the engine at a more central balance point, namely, behind the driver. Called the cab-over, designers had been experimenting with it since Ted Jones' Miss Thriftway 2 of the early 1960s. Another important advance in this area was the so-called pickle fork-shaped hull, which quickly became a standard in modern unlimiteds. In order to generate more lift, designers cut off the traditionally long bow and extended the sponsons to protrude out into twin hulls. They also added a horizontal stabilizer wing across the rear like an Indy 500 car. Combined by Ron Jones in a boat named the Pay and Pack in the early 1970s, the pickle fork hull and the rear spoiler allowed the vessel to go faster with increased stability. The Pay and Pack dominated Gold Cup racing for 4 straight years, until 1975 when Bill Muncey bought the boat. Drawing on their experience with the Pay and Pack, Muncey's Atlas Van Lines team built a new vessel the next year that combined the cab-over with the pickle fork and the rear spoiler. They named her the Blue Blaster. But Muncey still had doubts about the cab-over design.
I honestly felt that a driver sitting in the bow just wouldn't have the control over his craft that he had driving in the stern. After almost 30 years of sitting behind the engine, I felt absolutely naked the first time I perched myself in the cockpit of the new design. But once I got my bearings straight, once I learned to master the Thunderboat and not let it master me, and once I could feel that the boat was an extension of me and I was comfortable with it and seemingly wearing it better and better, I became sold on the design and the possibilities of maybe even winning a race or 2 with it.
When Bill Muncey arrived at the Columbia River in Washington in 1977, he had 5 Gold Cups to his credit. One more and he would break Gar Wood's 56-year-old record for the most Gold Cup victories by an individual. The Blue Blaster had been winning throughout the season and was running in top form. But Muncey wasn't about to take any chances, so as he approached the starting line, he pulled an old favorite maneuver.
All right, now the boats are beginning to make their move. They're starting to come down the stretch. All but Muncey and his Atlas Van Lines U1. I don't even see Bill. Wait a minute, there he is trailing the pack. He's way behind. In fact, Muncey may be out of it. Muncey better hurry if he's going to catch him. As they approach the starting line, some of the drivers are starting to hold back. Remember, it could be that some have started to make their move too soon. But here comes Muncey. Man, I want to tell you, he is flying. If he can hit that starting line just right, it's going to be way on his way to the victory. He's going to leave everybody else in his rooster tail. And he does. Here he comes. He is flying. Look at Bill Muncy. It's incredible. It looks like everyone else is standing still. Muncy came out of nowhere to take the lead going into the first turn. And believe me, that can be a very important lead.
Muncey's move at the start earned him a lead that he held throughout the race. In his first lap, he averaged 122 miles per hour, accelerating out of the corners in a matter of seconds. At the finish line, Muncey enjoyed his finest hour, a return to glory and a 6th Gold Cup to ascend to the rank of the legendary Garwood. Yet not everyone was as happy about Muncey's domination of hydroplane racing as he was. In fact, the more Bill Muncey drove the Blue Blaster to victory, the more a man named Bernie Little chafed. Little owned the Budweiser racing team. Beginning in 1964, his succession of Miss Budweisers had been regular winners, and eventually would become the longest and most successful sponsorship in the history of motorsports. But with the rise of the Blue Blaster, Miss Bud had been taking only 2nd and 3rd place. So in 1979, Bernie Little hired Ron Jones to build him a winner. Jones' idea was to install a Rolls-Royce Griffin aircraft engine with up to 1,200 more horsepower than the Merlin. Running in a straight line, the new Miss Bud could reach 230 miles per hour, a full 30 miles per hour faster than the Blue Blaster. Bernie Little had hit on a winning formula, and with succeeding Miss Buds, he began to beat the Blue Blaster. By the time Muncey brought the Blue Blaster to the World Championship race in Acapulco, Mexico in 1981, he was ready to retire her. For 2 years, she had been faltering, but Muncey desperately wanted one more victory for this, his favorite boat. In the first 2 heats of the race, he lost to Miss Bud. By the 3rd, he knew his only chance was to push the Blue Blaster to the very limits of her design. In a classic Muncey start, the Blue Blaster shot from the outside lane across the entire back of the field and picked up the inside lane right at the starting line, 20 miles an hour faster than the nearest racer. Coming out of the first corner, Muncey held his lead on the straightaway, well on his way to winning. But with no radio communication in those days, he could not know how far ahead he was, so he didn't let up.
He was pulling away, and his right sponson began to lift. And the boat just hung with that right sponson in the air for 100 yards. And then it continued to come up and climb up. And then once it exposed its full underbelly to the airstream, it tumbled and landed upside down.
Muncey suffered massive injuries and died almost instantly. At the time of his death, Bill Muncey was at the peak of his career. He had won 7 national titles, 8 Gold Cups, and had 62 career victories. His accident left his colleagues and fans stunned.
There are other drivers that won races, there are other drivers that are very good, but Muncey was the heart and soul of the sport in many ways. People loved him, people hated him, but he always got attention. And there was a huge hole in the sport when Muncey died.
Sadly, this tragedy was followed 1 year later by the fatality of another champion driver, Dean Chenoweth, who died when he crashed Miss Budweiser at 175 miles per hour. The deaths of these 2 men cast a pall over the entire hydroplane racing community. But they also forced designers and builders to finally recognize that it was time to introduce stricter safety measures. These precautions would lead to huge changes in the shape and performance of the unlimited hydroplanes. At the time of Bill Muncey's death in 1981, unlimited hydroplanes were routinely reaching speeds of 200 miles per hour. But whenever a boat flipped over, the driver, who was perched high on the deck in an open cockpit, was hurled out at bone-crushing velocity.
The boats have been surviving the accidents quite nicely, but the drivers weren't. So we said, let's take the same technology that we use in developing the boat and building the boat and put it into the cockpit, and then strap that guy into the cockpit and put him in the safest environment of any place in the race boat.
In a somersault or blowover, driver had a better chance at survival if he stayed safely in the cockpit. So designer Jim Lucero built a 5-point seatbelt system, lowered the cockpit, and tried enclosing it with a canopy. At around the same time, fellow designer Ron Jones also began to experiment with the canopy.
I found that the F-16 fighter plane was the only fighter in the whole world that had a one-piece blown canopy that you could see through all around, no structure in the canopy, and I knew instantly I had to have that.
In 1986, Jones was able to buy a few F-16 fighter plane canopies, and he fitted one on Miss Budweiser. The rest of the racing community was skeptical, believing that enclosed canopies would only trap the driver in a sinking boat after an accident. News of its effectiveness spread quickly, however, after a blowover in which Miss Bud's driver, Jim Kropfeld, not only survived, but came out unhurt. And by 1989, all competing unlimiteds were required to have covered canopies. Still, not everyone embraced the new safety measures at first.
Some of the drivers would phone me and say, "Ron, what are you trying to do, ruin boat racing for me? Part of my fun in driving a boat is trying to cheat death." And I thought those were unrealistic comments. So we have today, however, a driver that says, I have a fairly good chance of survival. We have made it very clear that the canopy isn't certainly a fail-safe, foolproof, do-it-all operation. What we have done is provided an environment around the driver which gives them a better chance at survival.